Hello, everyone. Welcome to Blue Devil Beat. I'm your host, Ranjan Jindal, here joined by my co-host, Caleb Dudley. Caleb, how are you doing, man?
I'm good, man.
Good. Well, we have also two special guests in the studio. We're not alone here to start. First up, we have Dom Fenoglio, our former sports managing editor, first time on the new podcast format. Dom, welcome back to the Blue Devil Beat.
Thank you. Good to be back.
And we also have our Blue Zone editor, Colton Schwabe, who covered the NC State game along with Dom. Colton, welcome to the first time on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So, like I mentioned, Dom and Colton covered Duke's 45-33 win against NC State Saturday. We'll recap that whole game with these two. And then later in the podcast, we're super excited. We're going to be joined by Zach Wolf of the Daily Orange to preview Duke's next ACC contest, the first road one up in Syracuse, which is going to be an exciting game. So we'll preview that with Zach. But first, this podcast is brought to you by Duke Stores. Support your favorite Duke team. Duke Stores is home to the only collection of merchandise brought to you straight from Duke University. Go to shop.duke.edu for all of your Duke merch. All right, so let's preview this NC State game, or not preview, recap, I should say. 45-33, a high-scoring, fun affair in Wallace Wade Stadium on a sweltering afternoon there for us peasants in the student section. But just overall takeaways, Dom, I'll start with you. What do you think led to this win for the Blue Devils, and what impressed you or did not impress you about Duke this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think Duke for the first 3 weeks of the season and for the first 29 minutes of the game, I would say, before that interception by Trey Freeman, which I'm sure we'll talk about. I think it was a team that was suffering from an identity crisis. I think you look last year under Manny Diaz and the 2 years prior under Mike Elko, Duke kind of prided itself on being this chip on your shoulder, beat you down, won't give up, hard-nosed football team. And I wrote last year about David Feely. I got to, sit through a workout with him, and I think everybody's talked about the culture he's built and the culture of the players like Dwayne Carter, Jamion Franklin, guys like that who have come through the program have tried to build. And it's not that the team was missing those pieces this year or that really that the team has played soft even. It's just Manny Diaz said after the game, and I think it was really apparent for fans who have watched the first 3 games of the season, that Duke was not playing with that same kind of verve or just energy,
That's a good word.
And
It's special.
sometimes it just takes one play. I think that Trey Freeman play was certainly huge. But I think what you saw was a team that was going to refuse to lose to NC State. I don't think they necessarily like those guys. I think there's a lot of personal reasons. They know those players pretty well. They wanted to win that game. And I think they realized that, their backs were against the wall. If they lost this game, that was going to bode pretty poorly for the rest of their season. And I was thoroughly impressed by the Duke that came out in the second half, especially the offense. I thought the defense was much improved in the second half. I mean, you saw a lot of missed tackles, especially in the first half.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we'll talk about things like that, but I think that this was exactly what Duke needed. They needed, if this game was won easily, I don't think it would have meant as much to them. I think they love the fact that they came back from that 20-7 deficit because that is exactly where they want to be.
Yeah, vintage Duke is like last year, that North Carolina game that we covered. Yeah, for sure. Agree with all that. Colton, what about you? What stood out from that game?
I thought it was just a combination of like NC State missing a couple crucial opportunities, and also Duke kind of on offense was really sticking with them. Like I think the CJ Bailey he had over 250 passing yards in the first half, which is pretty crazy. Like that was literally on pace for I think second all time for NC State.
Wow.
And for that to happen and still for Duke to come out 1 point, like with a 1 point lead after halftime is kind of a testament to, the Duke offense, but also the Duke defense for not allowing, 4 touchdowns in the first half, despite, over 250 passing yards and more for running. But I think, so for example, NC State misses the field goal, or not extra point,
yeah.
in the first half. And if they don't miss the extra point, I think they're not going to go for it on 4th and 2 potentially, right? And then you're never going to get an interception. And on top of that, like we were saying, for the Duke offense, they got the takeaway at the end of the first half, but you also have to score. Like you get the ball at the 12-yard line, but if Anderson Castle isn't on his game, like they're not going to get those points. And if Duke doesn't score the touchdown at the end of the first half, I don't think they're going to win that game, obviously. So
yeah, it's funny. It's almost like NC State's what hurt NC State has been what has hurt Duke for the first 3 weeks. A bunch of yards on offense, but not able to punch it in the end zone for a variety of field goal mishaps and turnovers, etc. But totally agree with you there. Caleb, what about you? What stuck out that probably hasn't been covered yet?
Yeah, I'll go. I mean, I think the thing was obviously it's a good win for Duke, but I think the defense still needs a lot of work.
Yeah,
especially on the back end. You look at the tackle leaders. The top 3 were all safeties, which is great, but that means they're getting past the first 7 guys.
Mm-hmm.
So Deshaun Stone, Caleb Weaver, Jaden Francois all had double-digit tackles, but that means the problem is the front 7 are not doing their job. Some of that, is Nick Morris going out and Luke Margat taking his place. Obviously, a big role for him coming the rest of the season with Nick Morris being ruled out for the year. But I thought, they had 11, and 10 tackles, but they still missed a lot. Those 3 guys missed a lot of tackles. Hollywood Smothers had an absolute day. When he would get to the second level, he was gone. I thought Duke benefited from Bailey missing some throws I think he usually makes and some decisions that he definitely wants back, especially that one that he threw to Trey Freeman. But I think there is, some bright spots looking ahead for that back end. I think Musa Kane was a big development.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he came in. He's a big lanky corner. I don't know if he came in maybe because Joe Lee is such a weapon for State in the slot there, or if just kind of depth they wanted to try him out. But I think he'll be hopefully featured more going forward. And then Coach Diaz said today that second half of the season they expect to have Terry Moore back, which will be I can't even express how good it'll be for Duke. Obviously he's one of the best safeties in the country, and so to have him to kind of shore up that defense that's been struggling to tackle will be massive.
Yeah, I think Diaz did say today in the presser that Musa Kane's responsibility was primarily on the third down defense to man up the tight end. And Diaz said it, I didn't double check him, but he mentioned that, the tight end didn't have any third down catches, and he was very impressed with Musa Kane. And I think that bodes well for a struggling secondary, not only adding depth, but adding a playmaker with size who can match up, maybe solve some of those problems that we've seen.
And I also think one thing that the Blue Devils struggled with on defense is containing those screen passes and short plays early in the game. The Blue Devils had a screen go for 70-plus yards on a 3rd and long, and CJ Bailey was able to use those to kind of get the offense going for NC State, and Hollywood Smothers, even on the ground, was able to get chunk plays. And so short passes and screens is something that Duke continues to struggle with. And going forward in this Syracuse game with the new starting quarterback in Ricky Collins, Fran Brown's going to try to get him comfortable. Well, I guess he's not calling the plays on offense, but the Syracuse will try to get him comfortable with screen passes and short plays. And when you have Chandler Rivers locking down one side, you got to make sure the other side is also as tight. So that's going to be a key for Duke moving forward. Let's talk about this defense a little bit, and then we'll talk about Darian Mentz's play. But on the defensive side of the ball, one unfortunate thing is that Nick Morris, a linebacker who last year had a season-ending injury, also went down early in the first half with a knee injury that'll keep him out for the season. Manny Diaz confirmed today at his press conference. Colton, what does that do to this Blue Devil defense, the loss of Nick Morris, and what do you think the Duke needs to do to step up and fill that hole on defense?
Well, if you think back to the Tulane game, it seemed like Duke really couldn't do anything to stop the run. Like Retzloff had, I think, 4 rushing touchdowns, which was Tulane's record for most. So when Morris went down, it was kind of a big deal because it felt like pretty much there wasn't anything that could happen for the run to stop. But it kind of seemed like the surrounding players kind of stepped up after his injury to sort of win the game for him and continue the defense without him. So I think that was a pretty big accomplishment by them.
Yeah, I will say one more thing is Diaz mentioned today as well that Luke Margat will be taking the play calling responsibilities for Duke the rest of the season. So for a redshirt sophomore who hasn't played a ton of games, he played in a lot of games but not a lot of snaps. It's a big responsibility, especially for a defense that struggled at times already to contain opposing offenses. I think seeing how he develops in that role will be huge going forward.
Yeah, and I think the 2 guys at Will and Mike linebacker behind him are both freshmen.
Yeah.
The depth chart that came out today, I think you had Elliot Shaper and Bradley Gompers, both, very talented freshmen, but freshmen nonetheless. One thing that I will say, Colton kind of touched on it, is that, a lot of the team really rallied around around Nick when he went down and really seemed to play with an added emphasis afterwards. And the problems that the Duke defense has had, I'd say, are somewhat schematic. It seems like at times they're just not matched up and offenses are really able to take advantage of them. But a lot of it's just missed tackling.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these players are capable of tackling. Otherwise, they would not be here. They would not be playing at Duke, and they would not be trusted in the positions that they're in. I think Trey Freeman's a great example of that. I think he had a lot of really tough plays that you watch back on film, and you're like, this is a play last year's Trey Freeman would have made. 2 years ago, Trey Freeman would have made. And then one play that stood out to me right before that Musa Kane interception, it's 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, and there's a short pass, kind of crosser across the middle of the field. Trey Freeman grabs him by the foot and trips him up to tackle him, forces a 4th down. That was the exact kind of play, you expect Trey Freeman to make that he just hadn't been making at that point in the season. And I'd say the optimist in me, or the optimist in Manny Diaz maybe, would argue that this is the kind of win, this is the kind of game, this is the kind of moment that the defense can rally around and say, look, Nick Morris went down, he's been our leader, but that doesn't mean we're not capable. The mistakes we're making, we can fix by tackling.
Yeah, and I think another thing to hang your hat on for the defense is turnovers. After only one through the first 3 games of the season, you get 3 interceptions and a fumble, and that's huge. And I know Manny Diaz, I'm sure, loved that in his press conference, a big turnover guy for him. All right, let's talk about this offense. Darian Mensah, once again, is playing out of his mind. 269 yards, 3 touchdowns. Colton, I'll start with you. What did you see from Mensah, and what made him so effective against NC State?
I mean, it was just that he really was playing well at, like, pretty much down for the entirety of the first half.
Yeah.
NC State opens it up with I think on the 3rd play they had a running touchdown, or maybe it was a passing, but it was for 70 yards. And then he went back the very next play, brought them down the field and scored. And then after they had the 1-point lead in the second half, I think their first drive was 4 plays for 75 yards. So to just use that momentum to have a quick start, a couple of big passes to open up the second half has just really got the offense going to kind of build their lead. And once they had the lead, they didn't really take the pedal off the gas. And, NC State behind started making some mistakes, and that was kind of the end of it for them. So it was just not getting too far behind. And once they had the lead, sort of extending that margin was pretty impressive, in my opinion.
Yeah, Dom?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll add is that I think Manny Diaz said after the game, the offense expects to score, and the only time they don't is when they beat themselves. And I think that was true, on Saturday. I think every time the offense didn't shoot itself in the foot with, negative plays, penalties, drops. I think that drop to Cooper Barkade, I think he made up for a few plays later. But, you take out a few plays like that, it seems like every drive they had ended in a score, which is remarkable. I think I loved the way that tight ends were involved, especially in the first half yesterday. You could see Darian Mensah go through his progressions and have enough time in the pocket to kind of check down to the tight ends. And that's a testament to pretty much everyone on the field, I guess, besides the receivers who need to get open. But, tight ends are doing their job. I think on 1 3rd down, Jeremiah Hazley kind of, ran a flat out to one side, cut back to the middle of the field, got open and made the catch. But the offensive line, I think, was great yesterday. There's maybe 1 sack that I can think of, but I remember on that big Anderson Castle run, Craycraft had a great block in there, just wide open hole. So I thought the offense played very, very well.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me with Mensah is obviously we know he has a lot of arm talent. He's a very talented thrower, but a couple weeks ago I talked to him in a press conference. He said, my main thing is I'm trying to speed myself up, my internal clock. I'm not playing with enough urgency. And I think that's starting to be on display. I think he's much improved in that regard so far. We're not seeing as many of those times where he just runs out of bounds for a 3-yard loss and he's actually throwing the ball or just throwing the ball away. Some of that is obviously credit to the offensive line, and I think that Nate Shepard in particular has really stepped up his game in pass protection from week 1. But I do think Mensah's, being more comfortable in the offense and with himself, with this pace of play that Jonathan Brewer has installed. So I think his internal clock has definitely sped up a lot, and it's been for the better for the Blue Devils.
Yeah, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago with him running out of bounds. And last week, the big emphasis after the Tulane game was, okay, Duke's offense was so good between Duke's 20 and Tulane's 40, but after that, they couldn't really do much. And I thought this weekend, it was so much better. Some of the touchdowns were deep plays anyway, but when you did go down there, you made the field goals and you converted touchdowns when you had to. And so that will be big. I also thought the running game was phenomenal. Nate Shepard and Anderson Castle, who are kind of 3 and 4 at the beginning of the season on the depth chart, have skyrocketed their way up. Manny Diaz said Jacques Moore wasn't 100% healthy, I guess, but I do think that part of the reason he was able to stay off the field is because of the play of of Shepherd and Castle. They're very different backs, but a nice little 1-2 punch that is good for Duke.
Yeah, and when you mention the red zone offense, I think 80% of that is rushes. You
Yeah.
know, like obviously Anderson Castle had a couple of big rushing touchdowns, but even on some of those other plays, they're set up by 5 or 6 yard gains in the red zone by Nate Shepherd, Anderson Castle. That
Yes.
opens up the playbook in a way that Duke rarely had last year, and at times this year struggled to do when defenses can key in on the run.
For sure. And I also like on the receiver core, I was telling Caleb Blake about this, and we talked about it at the beginning. I think this is going to be a very balanced receiver core throughout the room, and there's so many people that can step up on any given day. Cooper's probably made some of the biggest and best plays maybe, but he doesn't lead the team in receptions by far if he does at all. You have Hazley had 4 this weekend. He kind of broke out. Cooper, Samir, and Quayshawn all had 3. So, we'll see. It's a balanced and deadly offense there. All right. Anything we didn't mention that you guys want to know?
I was going to say, can we talk about that Landon King touchdown?
Oh, we can. Yeah.
That was
beautiful.
Yeah, it was a heck of a play.
Yeah.
He's like Don was mentioning, tight ends, another big guy there. He'll sometimes play out wide, and we're like, whoa, just throw it up to Landon.
Yeah.
And one thing that I thought was really interesting listening to the press conference today, talking about the tight ends, was obviously Jeremiah Hazley and Nicky Dalmolin went down with injury pretty early last year. And in addition to Duke not really being able to develop a run game, they weren't really able to develop a passing game with their tight ends. And that limited the playbook a lot. And I think this year you can see with Landon King and Jeremiah Hazley how much more it opens up, the play sheet for Jonathan Brewer when you can throw a go ball to your tight end and he can moss some poor defensive back who's going to be on a highlight reel the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the main thing, the story with all that, the running backs too, is just the physicality of his team is definitely improved from last year, even if the results haven't been, have been 50-50 so far this year. But I think, Diaz mentioned in the press conference at kickoff, like we're the fastest, strongest team that Duke's ever had, while he's been there at least. And I do think there's some truth to that. Especially at running back, Shepherd and Castle, I've never seen them fall backwards on a run.
No.
Every time they get the ball, they fall forward for extra 1 or 2 yards, which is huge. Especially on the goal line yesterday, Castle was not going to be denied. So for them to have that just extra oomph against a lot of teams in the ACC, that should go well for them the rest of the year.
Great point. Lastly, as we finish up, Duke's going to be playing Syracuse this weekend, and obviously a Syracuse-Cal back-to-back classic ACC road trip here. From you guys, we're going to preview it with Zach Wolf after you guys are gone, but what do you think Duke has to do to emerge from this trip 2-0 or, keep the momentum going? Colton, I'll start with you.
I think they need to continue their offense, which has been pretty successful even despite a couple losses over the past couple of weeks. But on defense, they really have to get back to their former selves, like we saw last season I think they had 4 turnovers against NC State. And if they can get the turnovers and that they can limit their penalties that are just a bunch of uncalled for penalties, which really affect them against Illinois and Tulane, I think that'll be the key. I think the offense is pretty consistent, but the defense is really, I think, what needs to change for them to find more success. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab at the offense, I guess. I think Syracuse plays really aggressive. I think they've got a couple of their secondary is really tough. I think they have one freshman corner, I think, who led the country in pass deflections or passes defended at some point in the season. And I think going on the road, there is a slight concern I have that, Caleb talked about Darian Mensah speeding up his clock. I think making sure that clock isn't sped up by too much. And I think that starts with establishing the run and winning the time of possession battle. And I think that Duke playing the game on their terms is the most important thing.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We had a great time with you guys. We'll be right back with Zach Wolf to preview the Syracuse-Duke matchup. Welcome back, everyone, to Blue Devil Beat. We're super excited here to be joined by Zach Wolf of the Daily Orange. Zach is a senior staff writer there who is also a football beat for the team. Zach, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me.
So let's start off with what's happened so far for Syracuse. If you haven't been keeping track of the season so far, the Orange are 3-1, most recently going down to Death Valley and taking down the Tigers 34-21 there in Clemson. Zach, you were down there. Why do you think Syracuse was so successful against Clemson, and what kind of led to the win there?
I think for me, the most surprising thing and the biggest thing for Syracuse in terms of the reason they won that game was the trenches. I mean, you look at Clemson and you just look at them on paper, and Fran Brown talks about it all week, how good they were on the defensive line, especially. And Syracuse's offensive line isn't necessarily the best. They've kind of shuffled a couple guys around and rotated a little bit, but that was like the biggest mismatch, at least on paper, going into the game in terms of the offensive line and for Syracuse and Clemson's defensive line. But from the opening drive, you really saw Syracuse want to establish the run, and they just ran it right down Clemson's throat. And that was it was a statement opening drive. They went right down the field, scored a touchdown, and they led wire to wire. So I think that was the biggest thing. Angeli got hit a bunch of times, but he wasn't necessarily taking sacks. He was getting rid of the ball. And then obviously when Angeli gets injured, Ricky Collins again, the offensive line was doing a decent job of protecting him. So again, I think that was the biggest thing. They sort of like just out physical Clemson. And again, like I said, they punched them in the mouth. They made a statement from the opening drive, and that was the key. I didn't think they would be able to protect their quarterbacks as well or establish the run, but that was kind of a big point from the win.
Yeah, I was really impressed with particularly Willis in that first half. He seemed to have his will there against a front that supposedly has, 2, 3 top 10, top first round picks there. And I was really impressed with that running game there. Can you talk about that rushing attack? You have Willis, you have Will Nixon too mixed in there. What is special about the ground game for the Orange?
Yeah, so I actually did a story on Yasin Willis early in the year, and I kind of just wrote about how he developed this tough running style. Again, his nickname used to be a train growing up in North Jersey because he would just run through people. So he's kind of a big bruising back. Obviously you had LaQuint Allen last year on the team. Will Nixon was out injured earlier in the for the season after like 3 games, so they didn't really get him. And LaQuint Allen got a lot of the carries, but Yasin Willis was always sort of waiting in the wings. And again, he's a big bruising back. He was out against the Colgate game, just a little bit of a stinger in his shoulder. They suffered week 1. But again, he's big physical back. He's a guy you can rely on. But I think they've used Will Nixon a little bit more than I thought. I don't know how much you guys know, but Will Nixon is actually Jeff Nixon's son, who's the offense coordinator for Syracuse. So again, I'm not saying nepotism or anything, but obviously Will Nixon has been very solid. He's very good in the screen game. And again, he was very good he was a very good third down back as well against Clemson. So I think they've done a good job of sort of mixing the two in between. Again, they're two kind of very different backs. Will Nixon is a lot smaller than Houston Willis. But again, Jeff Nixon, honestly, I'm not sure how much national attention he's getting, but I think by the end of this year, people are really going to know him as a known quantity in terms of an offensive mind, and he does a good job of in terms of building in the running backs, whether it be in the pass game or just scheming up open runs. And you saw Easton Willis kind of bounce off a couple tackles against Clemson, especially on that first drive. He broke off, I think, like a 30-yard run. But again, Syracuse's run game has been very solid, despite the fact that they passed the ball a ton.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with Jeff Nixon. He was the interim OC for the Panthers after they fired Joe Brady a couple years ago. So super familiar that he's a great offensive mind. Obviously, a big story from that game. You mentioned Steve Angeli getting hit a lot. He did not make it through that game. Injury, Achilles, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Out for the season. So what does that loss mean for the Orange, and what do you think his backup in Ricky Collins has the potential to do the rest of the season?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Angeli was that in December, Syracuse gets Ricky Collins from LSU. I'm pretty sure it was December, and they have their spring game, and Fran Brown didn't really announce a starter until after the spring game, and then he said Ricky Collins was a starter. But then, 15 days later, Steve Angeli, who was at Notre Dame and was fighting for the starting job there, he didn't win the starting job, so he transfers to Syracuse. An interesting connection on Syracuse is Nunzio Campanelli, who's the quarterback's coach, his brother Vito, who's the coach of Bergen Catholic in New Jersey, where Steve Angeli went to high school, is his brother. So Vito and Nunzio are brothers, obviously very close relationship. So Steve has kind of known Nunzio a lot of his life. Again, not saying that played a huge factor into him winning the starting job, but again, they went into fall camp between Ricky Collins and Steve, and it was a battle. Again, Fran Brown never really named a starter. He always said it was like 51-49% in terms of the snaps. But Steve Angeli won the job, and my opinion on it was that you saw Steve Angeli play against Penn State for that drive when Riley Leonard went out injured. So he didn't have a ton of in-game experience,
Right.
but he had a little bit more than Ricky Collins did. So I think what I saw was that like his floor is a little bit higher than Ricky Collins is in terms of just being a good passer. So in terms of Angeli as a player, I mean, he, like I said earlier with Jeff Nixon, he really has a good relationship with him. The passing game was very strong. It really looked its best, honestly, outside of a game against Colgate, who's an FCS opponent. It really looked its best in that first half. I mean, Syracuse has a ton of playmakers on the outside, and Angeli trusts them. I mean, he would throw up 50-50 balls, and they would go get it, whether it be Darryl Gill or Justice Ross Simmons. So again, I mean, it's a huge loss. I mean, he was leading the country in passing. The offense just looked like it was in a rhythm against Clemson. Um, and yeah, it'll be a massive loss. It'll be interesting to see, I think, with Ricky Collins, he can use his legs a little bit more than Angeli. He's less of like a pocket passer. Fran Brown said he's a pass first guy, obviously, at his press conference today, but I think people that kind of pay attention to just reading about Collins, they know he has that rushing ability. So I'll go back to Jeff Nixon. It'll be interesting to see how much the rush game increases or if they're still airing it out a bunch.
Yeah, awesome. Let's flip sides to the defense. Obviously, a unit that's kind of been a work in progress, gave up a bunch to Tennessee, but as far of the points front, kept Clemson in check, especially as the Tigers were kind of trying to come back there in the third and fourth quarter. What's your read on this defense, and what are some strengths, weaknesses of the Orange D?
Yeah, I mean, they really struggle to bring the quarterback to get to the quarterback. And in terms of it's really in terms of the defensive line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you saw against Clemson is Elijah Robinson was bringing pressure from different places. I think the guy should watch out for is Devin Grant. He was injured the past 2 games and came back against Clemson. And he really had an impact. They were using him in a ton of different ways. He was lining up all over the field and he was coming on a lot of delayed blitzes. There were a bunch of guys from the second level coming from delayed blitzes. So I think Elijah Robinson, Syracuse defensive coordinator, kind of realizes that their front four might not be able to get home as much, and he's going to have to find creative ways to get pressure. And they got to Cade a lot. They only sacked him once, but there were a bunch of plays where like they really easily could have gotten him, and Cade kind of just avoided them. I mean, one there was 2 Syracuse players and they ran into each other. And there was just a bunch where they had like a hand or 2 hands on him and they just couldn't bring him down. So I think that was a pretty impressive part. They part of the game. They put him under a lot of pressure. I mean, there were a lot of opportunities. Cade threw the ball 61 times, which I think is the most in his career. I'd be surprised if it wasn't.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a big thing going forward. Like they're going to try and manufacture pressure rather than just letting the front four try and break down the offensive line. Because against Tennessee, they barely got to Joey Aguilar. So again, that was definitely an interesting wrinkle against Clemson.
Yeah, it's a great point there. You've mentioned a few players on both sides of the ball, but now I'm going to kind of ask for a player who, fans may not be watching as much that you think could have a big impact. You can pick on either offense or defense in this game against Duke, but do you have an X factor or a player, a dark horse player to kind of watch for this game Saturday?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the easy pick is probably one of the receivers. I don't want to say that they're underrated, but if you look at a guy like Jonte Cook, he was at Texas, ran into some off the field troubles after transferring to Washington, never actually played there. I'll say him because he's this like dynamic receiver. He's very fast. He can line up in the slot. He can line up outside, but usually he's going to be in the slot. And he's just a playmaker with the ball in his hands. He's electric. He's very fast. And you saw that in Syracuse's first game against Tennessee. He had 5 catches, I want to say, 5 or 6 catches for like 58 yards and he cramped up in the second half. So he's kind of been a little bit banged up. And it's funny, he had around 150 against Clemson last week, and Fran Brown revealed post game they still not even at 100%. But I would definitely say Jonte Cook is sort of the X factor for this offense, especially with Ricky Collins now, and we might see a lot more like quick game passing. And he's a guy you can just get him on a bubble screen, just get him on a quick slant, and he can make a play happen.
Yeah, I definitely saw Cook hit a couple slants for good yards there against the Tigers, so definitely one to watch there. just maybe give us a few keys you think for Syracuse to win this game. Obviously, it's a big spot for both teams, especially with Syracuse coming off with a new quarterback, coming off a big win. So just some keys for Syracuse in your eyes, and then maybe a score prediction at the end.
Yeah, I would say the biggest key, like I said before, is just protecting Ricky Collins. The offensive line, we'll see how they hold up against Duke, and obviously they held up pretty decently considering how good Clemson's defensive line is. I would go protecting Ricky Collins, especially considering you don't want your now backup, your now starter to then go out and go down to your third string. I would say that, and then I would say keep the run game, keep establishing the run game. Don't go away from it. Again, you have running backs like Yasin Willis and Will Nixon there to rely on, and I would. Yeah, and just get the ball to your playmakers. Again, Jeff Nixon's very good at scheming up plays and against defenses and just manufacturing yards and putting up points. I don't know, obviously coming off a year with Kyle McCord last year, there was a lot of questions around whether this offense would be able to put up points. And you see again, there's just a ton of playmakers. Fran Brown's done a very good job of bringing in a lot of skill position guys and sort of building an identity around this offense. And you said you want to give me you want me to give a score prediction?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Uh, we'll see. We actually do a beat writer prediction at the Daily Orange where we predict every Syracuse game, and I haven't come up with mine yet because I don't know if they're going to win or not because it can be a letdown. It's the classic letdown spot, but also Fran Brown is just a very good coach, and like he has his guys ready to play. You saw that against Clemson when they punched them in the mouth. So if you had to ask me a score prediction right now, I would say Syracuse 30, Duke 27. I think it's gonna be a high
Wow.
scoring game.
Yeah, close one.
Yeah, I mean, again, we'll see. I think the fact that this game is at home is a big help for Ricky Collins. Again, he was in Death Valley, which isn't an easy place to go, but again, he was protecting a 20-point lead. It's very different coming into a game in the third quarter when you have that margin than actually starting a game and having that pressure. But yeah, I would go. I would go with that. Syracuse just eking it out, and especially at home, it's Parents' Weekend too, so the game is supposedly sold out. So yeah, that should be a big deal. And Fran Brown has talked a lot about in terms of like increasing attendance that you have to win games and sort of get people's attention, and I think he did a good job of that with this team beating Clemson. So yeah, I'll go with Syracuse by 3, but just.
Awesome, man. Well, lastly, before we let you go, obviously you guys have a lot of great content there at the Daily Orange. Tell all the listeners where they can find you on socials, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Zach Wolf 22 ZAKWOLF 22. In terms of the Daily Orange's social media, on Instagram, just the Daily Orange. And then all of our sports content, you can find it at DO Sports on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And then in terms of just our content online, just dailyorange.com. Again, I'll shout out my fellow beat writers, Aiden Stepanski and Cooper Andrews. We've been doing a lot of good work in terms of covering this team. Obviously, it's a very exciting time to cover Syracuse football. And Fran Brown has sort of brought a new energy to this program, which it didn't have with Dino Babers in the past. And the program was definitely going in the wrong direction. But now that Fran Brown is here, you can see that it's going in the right direction. And that, again, like I said, the win against Clemson just showed it.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys do phenomenal stuff and great analysis from you today, Zach. We had a great time with you on. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll be right back. All right, great stuff there from Zach. Like he mentioned, I obviously think this is going to be a big game for both teams and a lot of question marks, I think, and a game that can go either way. What do you think Duke has to do to defeat the Orange there on the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think Zach hinted at some of the weaknesses of the Orange team, and that's the trenches, especially the O-line. I do think Duke's, obviously Clemson's D-line is very good, and I think Duke's is as well. And so I think, Wesley Williams and BJ Anthony are going to have big games for Duke to be able to succeed. Obviously, with a backup quarterback, should be a little bit of nerves there for Collins. Hasn't played a lot of real-time reps either at LSU or now at Syracuse. So I think Duke can hopefully manufacture some good pressures there. And then in terms of the receivers, Zach mentioned, they have 3 guys, really, Justice Ross Simmons and Jonte Cook mainly, that are real weapons. out wide. I think Duke's had some problems at the secondary, obviously, so far this season. So I think just kind of clamping down on those guys is huge for them. Yeah, I think that's mostly it. You want to score right now too?
Sure, go for it.
I think not having Angeli will really hurt the Orange this week. First week with Collins, maybe just settle in a little bit, let down spot after Clemson. So I'll go Duke. Go Duke 28, Syracuse 20.
All right, yeah. I think what Zach said about possibly Collins' rushing ability is going to be key, because you saw what happened with Retzlaff and even Elon's quarterback in week 1. A running quarterback can change the dynamic. He's not a primary rusher at all. It seems like Fran Brown's going to have him heave it down the field, but that, especially with the loss of Nick Morris, is going to be huge. Can you contain the rushing quarterback of Collins, and can you also stop the running game? I mean, Willis was amazing against Clemson, and they were really able to neutralize that front. So stopping the run is key. And then the offensive side of the ball, I mean, Darian Mensah has played phenomenally. And I think Cade Klubnik missed a lot of throws that I don't think Mensah will miss. And there's going to be the secondary is a bit depleted for Syracuse, or has been, and so I think there's going to be open receivers, and Duke's offense is going to be able to push the ball down the field. And so I agree with you. I think Duke will score a decent amount. It's just going to depend on the defense. Can you hold them to the number, and can you force turnovers like you did against NC State? I mean, they come in bunches, and if Duke can turn over teams, this can be a scary unit. So I'll say, similarly to you, I'll go 31-24 Duke, 7-point game kind of there in the fourth quarter. A fourth quarter game, and maybe Duke's defense gets a couple big stops there to win it, kind of like they did against NC State.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a shame that Angeli's not playing, just because him and Mensah, I think, are second and third in passing yards in the country now. That would have been pretty fun to watch, but obviously Collins is super talented as well, so it'll be interesting to see how the Orange come out firing with him. Yeah,
and Fran Brown does a great job prepping his team, like Zach was mentioning, and I've just been super impressed with that. And Collins with a week under his belt, what is it going to look like? I still don't think he quite has the passing ability that Angeli did. But yeah, that is unfortunate for them. But it should be a fun game regardless. I'm super excited to watch it. We're now in kind of this stretch for Duke where you have back-to-back ACC games across the country. You got to go up to New York and then go over to California at 10:30. And so these two games, if Duke can win both of them, it puts Duke in a position where you have a bye week going into Georgia Tech, which is a very, very pivotal game as far as Duke's ACC hopes, and then a Clemson game, which looks less daunting than it was in the past. And so these two games are really big for Manny Diaz and co.
Yeah, it's the weirdest part of the schedule for sure. I think I called the end of it merciful in our preseason article. It's just the weirdest scheduling ever, but I think, obviously going to New York is the start of that stretch. It's huge for Duke to stay on the right track after that win against NC State.
Let's end this quickly with a brief stock up, stock down nationally of another fun week in college football.
Yeah, I'll go quick. I think up for me is Indiana. They came out, last year everybody said they can't beat ranked teams. They can't hold up against competition. They smoked Illinois. It was never close. I think it was they scored 63 points against an Illinois team that looked pretty good against Duke and they murked them. Fernando Mendoza looks the part as maybe QB1 in this year. He's dominated them. Signetti said after the game that all he needed to do was watch the film from the Duke game, and Indiana had what they needed, because they said Illinois just couldn't protect the quarterback, and they really couldn't. There was too much pressure on Altmaier that entire game. Then down, I'll go in the ACC. I'll go SMU. There's now 2 in-state losses to SMU to Big 12 teams. TCU this week was the loss. So just a little bit of a disappointing year after coming off the playoff appearance with Kevin Jennings for Rhett Lashley and company.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm going to go stock up to Texas Tech, who went on the road to Utah, not an easy place to play, against a really well-coached team who had been playing well up to this point and completely stifled the Utes. How about Will Hammond coming in from the backup quarterback position, tossing 2 touchdowns, and then that defense that has been bolstered through the portal. And obviously Texas Tech has put a lot of money into that program. What they were able to do is excellent against Utah, and I think this is definitely a team to watch in the Big 12 with how well they're playing on both sides of the ball. They haven't really had much competition to this point, but they showed that they can compete against the best. The schedule is very, very manageable, so I think this is a playoff flyer there.
I think the news was Morton's is fine for this week too, so they kind of dodged a bullet there and should be good to go the rest of the way.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, I think Morton still starts, but you have Hammond who played so well, so I'm curious how they handle that. And then down, we've probably beat this horn with with talking with Zach about Syracuse, but just what Clemson did against Syracuse, especially after the whole week and the lead up to this game. It's interesting because a lot of people are questioning Dabo's ability to change and
Yeah.
get people in the transfer portal. But for me, Clemson on paper has a very, very talented team. It's an execution and coaching problem to me. I mean, and I'm not saying coaching necessarily with Dabo, but across the board, I think there were some plays where you just didn't see execution, especially on the offensive side, where receivers were open or just reads were not quite there, and the chemistry between Cade and what now is a more experienced and better receiver core wasn't there. And then on the defensive side of the ball, it's just another week where the team kind of gets manhandled on the line and in the trenches, and you don't expect to see that from Clemson. And so, yeah, it's just another position down for Clemson. Obviously, there's a long season left, and they're going to have to prove a lot. But you saw this kind of got to Dabo there at the end. He was getting emotional on the field after the alma mater, and he has put so much into this team, and I think has gotten some undeserved criticism. But at the same time, you have to back up what you're saying with some sort of effort and performance, and I think that's not all there for every player on this team. So.
Yeah, I mean, for a team that has a couple guys are projected to go in the first round in April, and some guys in the next couple rounds too, for them to kind of come out this flat so far this season is really surprising and disappointing, honestly, for the ACC, and I think just general fans of football to see Clemson like that. But yeah, so still a lot of season left. What are they 0-2 in the ACC now though?
Yeah.
So it's gonna be an uphill climb for sure. But yeah, a lot of season left.
Yeah, it's baffling for sure. But you got a bye week, which is necessary for the Tigers before the UNC Clemson game. Somebody's got to win that game.
Yeah, that's gonna be on Cartoon Network. I saw 10 a.m. Flex.
All right. Well, on that great note, thank you guys so much for listening. Again, follow our coverage ahead of the Syracuse game, and there we will, like we mentioned to Zach, not be there in person, but we'll still be doing all our normal things. Great coverage across the board. Follow us on Instagram, X, all that good stuff. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will be back next week for a Cal preview at 10:30 p.m.
Yes, sir.
That's just way past my bedtime already for the start of the game, but that's okay. All right, well, thank you guys, and have a great week. For Caleb Dudley, I'm Ranjan Jindal. This has been Blue Devil Beat.